Hello, and welcome to Pathways to Healing, the Perfect Step podcast. We are your hosts, Cody Norman
and Logan Fry, paralysis recovery specialist at the Perfect Step, also known as TPS.
We are not doctors and are not prescribing anything, as this podcast is for informational purposes and should not be considered legal advice.
We are, however, sharing knowledge and experience that we have gained from working for years with clients in the paralysis community.
The guests on this podcast will include either experts in their respective fields or individuals sharing their unique experiences with paralysis.
Suggestions and advice that we share may affect each person differently, as not one injury or diagnosis is the exact same.
We are hopeful that the outreach of this podcast will allow us to give help and guidance for individuals suffering from paralysis.
We understand that this spread of knowledge is important and takes an entire community coming together. On this episode of Pathways to Healing, we had special guest Rowena Gates. She is the principal and vice president of Eng3 Corporation, who launched NanoVi technology.
On this episode, Rowena touches on her background in education. Her PhD from the University of Washington gives a fundamental understanding of how NanoVi works, who it can help, and the future of NanoVi. Stay tuned on Pathways to Healing. Welcome back to Pathways to Healing. On tonight's episode, we have on Rowena Gates. Hello, Rowena.
Hello, nice to be here.
Hi, Rowena. Thanks for being on the podcast tonight. It's a pleasure to have you on. If you wouldn't mind just giving the guests a little bit of a general intro as to where you're from and who you are.
Sure, I'm Rowena Gates, and I'm a co-founder of Eng3, which is a company that produces the NanoVi device. And I kind of backed into this. I was a tech entrepreneur for many years. And when I discovered that the health space is so helpful to people, I kind of shifted over to this space. And then my co-founder and I started what is now NanoVi.
Awesome. That's amazing. So to go a little bit back, a little further into your history, talking about your education, you got a PhD from University of Washington. Is that correct?
Yes.
If you want, you can start there, or even if you want to go a little bit further back and talk about maybe your undergraduate, you don't have to, but if you want to give a little background on that.
Sure. I started out, my undergraduate was in education. I taught high school for a few years, and then I went back and did a master's and a PhD. And both of those were focused in regional economic development. And my focus was probably the first PhD on strategic alliances, which were brand new back then. This was a few years ago. And it's just a collaborative approach to things. And I started that at a time when everything was more leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers, and it was a more aggressive business approach. And my belief was that collaboration just had to work better. And so I studied that for my dissertation, and that's actually stayed with me my whole life. I just really believe that things work together, and what we're currently doing with the NanoVi device, it just works so well with other interventions and supporting what other people are doing in their practices. So that thread has carried forward, even though my PhD wasn't medically oriented.
Mm-hmm. I love it. What are you mentioned a little bit about that working with other devices, that working with other technologies and practices. What are some other practices that you've noticed that NanoVi has so coincided with and worked well with?
We have a lot in hyperbarics and cryotherapy and brain training and PEMF. And then you see a lot of combined use with red light therapies. And I know you guys are doing some of these things, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we definitely are. Okay, we kind of talked about this, but for people who don't know what NanoVi is, can you give the most basic kind of 5-minute spiel that you would give on what NanoVi is, how it works, why it works?
Okay. First of all, the way it works is that you're inhaling humidified air from the device. It's pretty simple to use. And the reason we're doing that is we're using that humidified air to influence the water in the cells. So when the humidity hits the mucous membrane, it transfers an energy state into the body. And inside the NanoVi device, we've essentially excited those water droplets with specific wavelengths that can be absorbed by water, and those wavelengths excite the water droplet and create the form of water that's needed in cell biology to support the cells. And so it's pretty simple to use and non-invasive.
Okay, so the first thing that I hear, and this might be from my personal background, is it kind of sounds a lot like a nebulizer for individuals who have asthma. Is that kind of right? Like the same concept of inhaling the
Um,
oxygen? I mean, obviously a different solution, but
right, and it is inhalation. Usually the nebulizers nebulize a substance, so that would be a big difference because this is substance-free, and, therefore, the advantage is that it has no contraindications. It's supporting the environment in the cells, but it doesn't override anything.
awesome. Thank you for giving that explanation. I think that helps us a lot and probably the viewers. Can you talk a little bit more about the mechanisms and how it affects the body and the results that you guys have seen?
Sure. So when the humid airflow hits the mucous membrane and transfers this energy state, it's what's called exclusion zone or easy water. It's also called the fourth phase of water, which is called that because it has different characteristics than solid gas or ice. So it would be, I'm sorry, a solid gas or liquid. And so sitting between liquid and solid is a sort of gel form of water that's really crucial for cellular function. And so that's what our device is creating in the cells. And it's also what your body's naturally producing to support these cellular functions. And so we essentially copied the body and augmented by creating this form of water outside the body and delivering it.
Hmm.
And then what we're doing specifically here is the energy state that we create is required for proteins to fold. And so that's another cell biology story that's quite involved. Most people are used to proteins and they think of what they eat, which is important because that gets amino acids into the system.
Hmm.
But what we're doing with proteins is when the amino acids get shredded down by the body and rebuilt into chains of amino acids that are the primary shape of a protein. And that primary shape is just a string of amino acids, and it has to fold into a complex 3D shape in order to function. And it needs energy to do that. It can't just magically change shapes.
Mm.
And so it gets that energy from the water.
Hmm.
And this was known in cell biology. And so our innovation was to augment what the body naturally does by creating it outside and delivering it through inhalation.
Wow. Where did this innovation come from? Where is that background originated from?
Um, there was the cell biology has a life of its own,
Mhm.
and but there was some early work done at the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany that was suggestive. And so that it was sort of the foundation of it. That was many years ago, probably at some point in the 90s, that was done. And it was known that proteins work this way. And so we already had that to leverage. And so by our innovation was to copy what the body does to create this state. And that was also known in cell biology, a specific wavelength in the spectrum. And just to give you an idea, it's up closer to 1300 nanometers, whereas other therapies that you typically think about, lights and lasers and so on, are much lower in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Mm.
So red light's somewhere in, 600, 700 nanometers, and then lasers kind of take over and they go up to about 1,000 nanometers. So we're essentially well above that.
Wow.
That's awesome. So once it's transferred into the cells and it does fold that protein, what happens next?
So the body has to fold the protein that we just help. So we're creating a better environment.
Creating a better environment to allow for the folding process of the protein.
Correct. Exactly. And the proteins they make up your body and they do all the work in the body. They literally are every function that goes on has proteins involved in it. And so it's very fundamental to just help them work better.
If you don't mind explaining, what is the mission of NanoVi technology, and if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Eng3?
Yeah. Well, it's really to help ideally millions of people with a non-invasive device that doesn't override the body's natural wisdom.
Is there any sort of specific populations that you guys are hoping to aim towards, or is this for the generic population in general?
Well, the areas that we target are people interested in recovery, and that can be recovery from sports and exertion, or even cognitive exertion, or it could be recovering from a chronic illness. But anytime the body needs to repair and regenerate, that's a good place for NanoVi. And then the other area is performance, essentially health span, but there's, measurable improvements in performance when people have their cells working better.
Are you able to speak on any of those instances of the improvement in performances by those individuals?
Yeah, absolutely. One area is oxygen utilization, that the cells would use oxygen better. And so people will kind of mistake it as an oxygen device because if someone's low in blood oxygen, it will go up. But it's only because it's better utilization of oxygen is working better. And so that's one area that's a performance factor. And mitochondrial function is really important. And that's measured by respiratory exchange ratio or VO2 max that indicate mitochondrial function. And those can substantially improve in one session.
Wow. And that's obviously one of the reasons why we have that in our recovery room here too, is a lot of our clients do suffer from the ability to take deep inhalations. Right. And so I think something like NanoVi, it just serves such a great purpose for a lot of the clients that we have here and the population in general, of somebody that has maybe their diaphragm being affected from their injury or diagnosis.
And that's measured with peak flow meter or spirometry, different measures of the lungs' ability to function. And so it's definitely a use. We get into the chronic illness when we talk about COPD and other things that diminish function. But it's definitely been a big factor for us in the past. And for the first many years of the company, it was almost all chronic illness that NanoVi was used for.
Really? That's so interesting. Did you guys end up doing any studies on how the NanoVi affected those with neurological diagnosis?
We haven't studied any of the diseases specifically, and we never do that actually because we're a class 1 medical device, and we won't get to the point where we can make medical claims. But with cognitive function, like looking at brain endurance, looking at cerebral blood flow or cerebral oxygen utilization, there's ways to indicate brain performance. And brain endurance is a good one. So it's measurable in the context of neurofeedback. If people are being measured in those respects of how the brain is actually functioning, or with before and after scans of acute EEG. So those things you can see what's going on in there with a whole range of different measurements that have been used.
Awesome.
It's pretty exciting for you to kind of see those data analytics and see those numbers change for people.
Yeah, it's super exciting. When we saw the results of just the very preliminary testing with oxygen utilization in the brain, and that it maintained an hour after the treatment,
Mhm.
which is really key, that it didn't just spike and drop right off again.
Yeah.
That's so exciting, and we'll study that, because again, oxygen utilization is not a medical claim. However, you can extrapolate that that's a good thing
Mhm.
for
Absolutely.
brain health.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I feel like that's a fine line being a medical device company and making medical claims versus claiming, rehabilitation. How have you guys been able to walk that line and really focus on the recovery components, but also not trying to make medical claims?
It's tricky. We do, I mentioned earlier, we don't study diseases per se. We have tons of anecdotal evidence about that, but we don't, make claims that it's helpful. There is some language that makes it a little more possible to say things. For example, talking about the user group of NanoVi versus about what it does for that user group.
Okay.
Mm.
And what's really helped us the most is in the last probably 6 or 7 years, people have really started to focus on their health, their well-being, performance, health span, longevity is a hot topic, all of that. And so that's created a market demand that's an impressive market demand that's not related to diseases.
Absolutely.
And so that's huge for us.
Like you're saying, I think the lifespan, longevity, and quality of living thing, it's one of the most important factors right now than I think it's even ever been, just because of how much knowledge and information there is out there for us to learn. And speaking of different people and populations that you guys do treat, or I guess that you guys do serve using NanoVi technology, what are some of the most prevalent populations that you have seen? Has it been more athletes or more people that are getting into, let's say, 50s or 60s, or more of people with neurological disorders? What have you seen personally most of?
And then also, from your perspective, where do you think your target population lies?
So we've seen a lot in that 50, 60 plus age group. That's probably our biggest, segment of what you mentioned, because those are people that want to stay active and keep doing the things they love, regardless of, their biological age, or I should say their chronological age.
For that population, 50 to 60, do you know if there's a correlation amongst neurological diagnosis or severe injury with that same population when you guys are getting them? Or are these able-bodied individuals who have no previous medical history?
Ours, we get both, but a lot of them are people with no previous history and nothing that they can ascertain, which doesn't mean there isn't already decline.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned athletes, which is a group we love and we are very interested in. We're not just like on every corner in professional sports, although those same individuals often want to use the NanoVi device to recover because they exert themselves. And that exertion can be either mental or physical. Like they recover faster, they feel more energy, they feel better.
Totally, that makes sense. That's actually a question I was going to ask is what kind of different qualitative measures that you've seen in individuals that have been using NanoVi technology? We talked a little bit about the quantitative data, but what are maybe some of the qualitative things, maybe seeing from a mental health perspective or even maybe from a physical also perspective?
Mhm. I think the biggest, broadest one.
The Be Perfect Foundation is not just a name, it's a promise. A promise to individuals living with paralysis that they are not alone in their journey. Founded by Hal Hargrave Jr. in 2007, after his own life-altering accident, we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization dedicated to providing direct financial and emotional aid. Inspired by a quote from the movie Friday Night Lights, we believe that being perfect is about doing everything you can, especially for yourself, your family, and your friends. With nearly $10 million raised and a 100% volunteer staff, your support goes directly to those in need. We assist with medical supplies, wheelchairs, home adaptations, and exercise-based therapy programs. Our board of directors receives no salary, ensuring that almost every dollar donated makes a real impact. Visit BePerfectFoundation.org to donate or learn how you can get involved. The Be Perfect Foundation, changing perceptions daily.
Is de-stressing. And that is actually measured with heart rate variability. But in our society, just a massive number of people are overstressed. And then the other related to that is sleep. And so those two areas are really broad-based for our users, is better sleep and coming out of that stress mode.
And we could all use that for sure. What?
You
Yeah.
guys are too young. You don't need this.
We still need sleep. I mean, if something is going to
That's
help
true.
the sleep, I think.
I was going to say that's actually something that pro athletes really notice, especially in baseball when they're playing all the time. And that's that being able to get to sleep after playing, and they're supposed to, go home at 11 o'clock at night, sleep and play the next day. So kind of
Yeah, I
schedule.
think that's just one of the biggest populations that deal with sleep deprivation, like you said, because of the elongated season. You're playing 162 games, but also you're traveling so much and you have the jet lag and you have, like you said, condensed sleep hours where you have only a certain amount of hours before you're supposed to sleep and before you're supposed to get up and go to your what their job is the next day. So I think that's a great population that if they're able to see an increase in sleep from something like that, that'd be very useful.
Yes, and how, I mean, obviously we know how physical that a job like that can be, and being an athlete, football, baseball, whatever sport it may be also though too. There's so many factors that come to that point. I think not only is that physical side now being able to recover, but I think mentally, kind of like you said, holistically knowing that you are recovering and thinking those thoughts of this is good for my recovery and this is good for my body, I think also kind of takes that stress off the individual of thinking like, I'm not going to be recovered for this next bout or this next game or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine how they experience this. But it's a huge challenge, and especially those people on the West Coast, because all of us are on the West Coast, but when they fly east, they have a harder time than the other way around.
Yeah, earlier times, I guess, is how you would describe that.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that either. I mean, from my perspective, getting sleep, I think just a great target population is like new parents. That's just off the top of my head over the last 4 months. I can definitely tell you my sleep hasn't been the same. So maybe I need to get on the NanoVi and have it help with my sleep. For you, Rowena, again, because I think you have the most experience with seeing different populations, for you, who do you think the target population, if you had to pick one of those groups, would be? Where do you think you guys could be the most beneficial? And if you want to just say everybody, that's totally okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
Everybody.
yeah, definitely.
I'd say healthy aging is really a huge one. The people who really want to avoid those chronic illnesses that I spoke about earlier.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think for everybody, right? Just it's scary getting older, and I know you're gonna laugh at us for saying that, but I think like the concept of getting older and understanding that there's certain components that come with that are maybe not advantageous or are a little scary. So if there's anything you can do to do it, I think a lot of people would. Just like, you hear exercise is going to allow you to be healthier and have a longevity of strong muscles, strong bones, all of those different things. So being able to do something like that is going to be beneficial.
If I can go back to, we were just talking about sleep, so just wanted to go back to that a little bit. But a lot of our clients that we have here, suffer from spasms a lot and suffer from discomfort and a lot of maybe nervous system pain and neuropathic pain. I think that's one of the biggest components of, because of that happening, they have disruptions in sleep a lot of the times. So something like NanoVi, hopefully improving the quality of their sleep, I think goes a long way. And that could even be a component that we should be talking about more in our recovery room here.
It would be great, and it wouldn't be surprising that it plays a role in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But that's sleep is, fundamental to all those healing processes. So that would be a nice difference.
Yeah. I have a question that I'm not sure if you guys have done any studying or looking into. I'm sure you guys have, because from what I remember, you guys have both a nasal component for the device and also like a full mask. Have you guys seen a difference between nasal breathing and mouth breathing with the effectiveness of the device?
We don't have very many, with using a mask. We have either a tube that they can inhale from directly or a nasal cannula,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as they're used correctly, then there's no difference in the impact on the body.
Hmm.
So when they're using a tube, if they've got it too far away from them, then it will diminish the effectiveness.
Yeah, but as long as it's getting into the body, then you're seeing the positive effects.
Correct, and even with breathing, it has to touch the mucous membrane, which can be before the lungs. I mean, the lungs are great at that,
Mm-hmm.
but it can just go in through your nose and your sinuses and so on and touch mucous membrane.
See, that's so interesting to me because I would have thought there would have definitely been a difference between the nasal breathing and because I mean, you see all this stuff nowadays about how nasal breathing is so much more beneficial. But that's so cool to hear that as long as it's getting into the body, you guys are able to track those positive effects.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, the breathing well correctly is a huge factor, as is sleep and exercise. And if you have those three things, you're in really good shape,
Yeah, and
and they're all free.
exactly. That kind of leads me to the last thing, though. Have you guys noticed a difference between an individual who is hydrated and dehydrated?
We have not measured that.
Hmm.
So we haven't noticed that difference, but I would argue that the cell will always function better if it's hydrated. Like, that's another fundamental one to me.
It all makes sense because, I mean, like you said, sleep, hydration, breathing
yeah.
properly,
Yeah.
and exercise. All those different components are going to allow you to have longevity. So that would make sense. But I mean, like you said, I think you guys are somewhat in the infancy stages of testing all of these different partnerships between NanoVi, right? And how they work effectively with all these different things. Do you have an area in which you're most excited to look into? Is it sleep? Is it exercise? Is it hydration? Maybe diet? Anything like that?
It's brain.
Brain.
I've always been fascinated by that. So personally, I'm interested, but it also a huge area of concern and where people are interested in improving, which didn't used to be the case. Everybody would kind of sign off on it and say, "Oh, my mother went downhill. I guess I will too," or whatever. But people are really taking ownership, and I love that. And so the brain function is really interesting. We are doing some work in that area now. And then we're also looking at more mitochondrial function, because if you get under the hood of all the different medical disciplines, all the things that can go wrong, the metabolic function is the cornerstone. And so if you can address that, a lot of the other things are going to fall into place.
What are some of those other things? You said a lot of the other things falling into place. Would you mind elaborating a little bit about maybe some of those other things that you guys have seen kind of fall into place in a sense?
Well, every chronic illness will be related to metabolism, cell metabolism, and metabolic processes. So something's not working well. There's too much damage and not enough repair, if a chronic disease exists. And so that's why I think it's just it's so exciting to be working at a fundamental level that's below that.
Hmm.
And I didn't mention this, but the only reason you have DNA is that it's the blueprint for your proteins. And we think of how fundamental DNA is. Well, proteins are just as fundamental. And so that's part of what's so exciting about how things can be improved. But if you had really good metabolic function, most of those illnesses wouldn't exist.
And when you say the brain is the thing that you're most excited for, do you mean healthy brain?
Yeah, or like what you're doing with recovering brains and bringing functions back online. I think there's so much now that we've learned, the ways the brain can be stimulated and to help it actually regain function. And the neuroplasticity and the potential to repair is just unlimited, it seems.
Yeah, and I think of not only neurological injury with neurological deterioration, but other things like alcoholism and how alcohol has that negative effect. Has that been something that you guys have thought about looking into?
We have not. It's interesting because I just got back from an addiction um, trade show for addiction, but we've not looked at alcohol use. I think the underlying thing is if the person feels better, they're going to have a much easier time of kicking bad habits and coming back online to be functional.
That makes sense. And that's so interesting. Can you touch on if there was an ulterior motive for you guys to go to that convention on addiction, or if it was just something that you kind of were looking into?
It was suggested that we go there by an individual that was introduced to us by Tony Robbins.
Hmm.
And he was pointing out how challenged people are with addiction, not just with the addiction itself, but it's very hard on your physiology and mental health. And so he thought it would be a very good venue for NanoVi. And we were kind of like, well, sure, let's try it. And it was very different from something we'd done before. And clearly, you could see how recovery centers could really take advantage of NanoVi because they're working with both the brain and the body, usually for 6 or 8 weeks while people are there. So they can easily, one device can serve many of the patients, and they can use it every day really easily.
Are there any other workshops or interventions that you guys have been a part of recently?
We do various ones. We've done some with chiropractics, a couple of those recently. And that's both functional neurology, so the brain side of it, and also the sports and performance or just general rehabilitation. So those have come up recently. And we also did one that was more related to nutrition. And we did this mainly because we were invited to it and we were supporting one of the other companies there. And you may have heard of BrainTap, but it's a device that helps stimulate the brain. And it's very complementary to NanoVi, and we often work in conjunction with them. And so when they invited us, we said, okay.
Interesting.
So of all the potential collaboration efforts of NanoVi, the hydration, the sleep, the food, the exercise, which one do you like the most and which one kind of grabs your interest?
Well, all of those things that are just physiological functions, I'd say all of the above, depending on, how urgently the person needs hydration or sleep or whatever. And then with respect to other devices and other interventions that we complement, of course, I like the ones for brain performance, but a really big one for us is hyperbarics. And then probably second to that is cryotherapy, because those centers just get better outcomes if they pair what they're doing with NanoVi.
We do have localized cryotherapy. Obviously, it's different than the chamber of cryotherapy, but how would those two things be similar to each other, or would that work more effectively in somebody that's in a cryotherapy chamber instead of it being localized?
It should be both, because those both interventions are going to kick in cold shock and heat shock proteins. And those are proteins, and they need to be able to fold to function. And so if you can advance that by supporting those protein functions, then the results should be even more effective.
Beautiful.
That kind of randomly kind of sparked another question of, have you guys potentially thought about looking into fasting and the effects?
We have not done fasting and the effects. I do have one weight loss doctor that came back and said that using the NanoVi helps people when they have a very calorie restricted diet because they can maintain their energy even without the calories. And
Wow.
I can imagine that's similar with fasting. However, we've not studied it, and we don't have a lot of feedback on it.
I personally just did a 3-day fast, and it was not the most fun experience, if I'm going to be honest. But I think maybe using the NanoVi during it would have helped with some of the components, because I think the major restrictions about it for me were lack of recovery, my sleep wasn't as good, and a little bit of muscle fatigue. So, like you said, if you can do something like that, and then a lot of that is just the shock proteins, if that has also helped, I think that could be a very interesting field where you guys might be very applicable.
Yeah. Well, for your next fast, let's do it. Let's check it out and see how you feel.
Absolutely. Give me a couple months. Like I said, it wasn't my favorite thing I've ever done, so I'm not in a rush to do it again. I know a lot of people say they do those and they feel fantastic and it's the greatest thing, but personal experience was it wasn't the best. I will say the fourth day after the fast, I felt great, but I honestly couldn't tell if I felt great because of how bad I had felt the previous 2 days or if it was, above my baseline. But next time I do a fast, that's something I can look into, and maybe we can do a case study with me and Elmer, our tech guy, because he did it with me, and we had very different experiences with the fast. He was great. He had high energy the whole 3 days, and by day 2, I was crawling instead of walking.
I won't be partaking in the fast, so I can help with the research aspect of it.
Yeah. Okay, you have to oversee. Somebody's got to be adult in the room.
Exactly. It was not me, no. But yeah, I think like we were talking a little bit earlier, all of these components of good hydration, good exercise, good diet, if it is just something that helps you be healthier and allows for all of those other components to be a little easier, I don't see why people wouldn't be, getting in line and trying to jump on board.
Just genuinely curious about when Eng3 started and when NanoVi technology started. When was the year that you guys had opened Eng3, and then when did you guys first launch the NanoVi technology?
Eng3 was started in 2003. We started the patent work, and the company that's now NanoVi started in 2007. And the first product was released in 2011, in there, 10-11. So it's been on the market for a while, but as I said earlier, a lot of that early history of the company was for chronic illness.
Where did those first NanoVi technology devices go to originally?
They were all integrative doctors, often the really integrative ones, because it was outside the scope of what they'd normally seen, things they'd never seen before. And one of those doctors is here in Seattle, Dietrich Klinghardt. And if you look him up, he's just one of those forerunners to a lot of the stuff that's out there, certainly for autism and Lyme and detoxification. He just was, I don't want to say experimental, but very much on the leading edge.
That's cool.
And so he would step into something like NanoVi because he could appreciate and understand the value, which is, and he was more brave than a lot of MDs. Because MDs have to worry about their licenses, and they tend to be a bit more cautious, wisely so. And he kind of recognized it early, so he would be an example. And then he trained doctors, and so then the people he trained might get them, and then their patients would get their own. So that was kind of our early market, and it was a lot of word of mouth and referral.
Very cool.
Are you or a loved one living with paralysis and searching for a path to recovery and hope? Look no further than The Perfect Step. Our unique exercise-based recovery programs have helped clients with conditions like spinal cord injury, stroke, Parkinson's, and more. With our approach, many clients experience improved function, reduced medication, and even freedom from wheelchairs. But we're not just a program, we're a community of support. You'll meet peers who understand your journey, along with specialists dedicated to your recovery. Visit us today at theperfectstep.com. The Perfect Step, where recovery begins.
To backstep again, you talked a little bit with me about your personal experience with NanoVi. Can you go back into that and your own recovery from, I think you said you had a diagnosis with your arm?
Oh, that preceded NanoVi.
Oh, that preceded NanoVi?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did have, everybody, just so you know, I had a neurological injury where I was supposed to have lost the use of this arm. which you can see is working.
Definitely.
And I'm only pointing that out because you just have to know the body's designed to heal itself. And I think that knowledge and just, there's very likely a way if you help it and find ways to heal. So
did that personal experience lead into you wanting to transition your career path away from a PhD in economics of a sort into the health and wellness community?
Absolutely, because I think I had tried 22 different interventions when I finally got the use of my arm back. And so I was kind of a bit of a hobby professional at alternative health. And I did everything, all kinds of different interventions because conventional medicine didn't have a solution for me.
Can you talk about what finally worked for you?
I was just going to ask, what was the most effective?
Yes. Feldenkrais, which is a technique where they basically retrain the brain by moving the limb or stimulating it. And the brain will readopt the best way of functioning if you teach it how. And so Feldenkrais is essentially teaching it. You guys do this every day.
Yeah, I was going to say, sounds somewhat familiar. Yeah, we have a different name for it, but repetitious movement patterns to help promote neuroplasticity of the brain.
Exactly. And Feldenkrais would be much more subtle, but it is still profound. And that was the one that after all of those years, it's the one because my nerve wasn't completely severed. They said it was damaged beyond repair, but it wasn't fully severed, and so I didn't believe that it was damaged beyond repair.
Where can the listeners or viewers find more information about that?
I can spell it for everybody.
Yes, please. Some of us aren't good at spelling.
It's Feldenkrais. So Feldenkrais, if you even get close to that, you'll find it, and because it's a pretty well-established discipline, and there's some very good trainers out there that teach. They're really we are students when you're learning, when you're being treated with Feldenkrais, and I was very fortunate that one of the people who's top in the world and has trained a huge number of the current practitioners, his name is Jeff Haller. And he's in the Seattle area, and he's the person that got the use of my arm back.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations. That's
amazing.
Cool. But I think a lot of it goes down to also your ability to keep trying new things and pushing the envelope of what maybe is traditional in recovery and not giving up and finding a way to get the results that you want. So congrats and kudos to you.
And thanks for sharing.
Also shout out to Stan Herring, who's an MD here, who basically said, well, as long as you'll keep trying, I'll keep, doing pain management and prescribing physical therapy. Anything I can do to help you, I'll do. And Stan hung in there with me all those years. And so he's near and dear to my heart.
Wow.
And I think he's been the Seahawks medical doctor and also the Mariners. I think he's served on both those teams.
Wow. That's so cool. That's amazing.
And you guys will appreciate that Stan Herring is the one that got regulations changed for high school sports that were doing traumatic brain injury.
Really?
Yeah. He really made a huge impact on protecting kids.
Well, looks like we need to
more about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say have a little bit of research to do into that scope.
That's amazing. Rowena, would you mind taking us through a day in your life as the principal and vice president of business development at Eng3 Corporation?
They're really variable. And so I travel a lot, depending on the time of year. So in the last 6 weeks, I've been gone 4 of them. And so that's a totally different schedule than right now. I'm at my desk most of the time, and then I'm playing catch up. And I just have a big long list of things I have to cross off, people I need to speak to or send information to, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really varies a lot. And it's not, usually maybe once or twice a week, I'll do a podcast recording like this. And so those gets, grouped in when I'm in Seattle, because I never like to do that when I'm traveling.
Makes sense.
Totally.
Technology can be a little challenging.
Yeah, and you notice my light was so bad, I apologized. And even here in my office, I don't get it right. So think what I could do in a hotel room.
No, it's okay. We definitely understand the difficulties associated with technology and doing a podcast recording. So we just are grateful that you took the time and came and gave all of your knowledge and experience to all the guests. A follow-up question on that is, you're somebody who went from the economic realm to health and wellness. You seem very knowledgeable when it comes to wellness, physiology, the anatomy, and all of those different components about the brain and the body. What has been your greatest educational resource about whether it's neurological injury or physiology and anatomy about the body that helped you in your process to be able to give a good explanation of how NanoVi is effective?
Listening.
Mm-hmm.
So I've listened to things many times, and then as I'm ready, I would dig in further and further to learn more. And the other thing is, I'm fairly narrow. So I'm not medically trained like, the whole spectrum of medicine. It's in our particular area, I understand it pretty deeply, usually deep enough to satisfy any questions that I come across. However, I don't have a huge breadth, like I can't repeat the Krebs cycle, for example.
Well, your knowledge is still very broad, and you showed a lot of information and shared that with us today. We're very grateful for that. And you've just been a pleasure to have on so far. So we really appreciate that a lot.
Oh, it's so fun to be here, and I love what you're doing. I absolutely applaud you and so appreciate all of you and Hal, and that I'm so glad NanoVi's there as well.
We are too.
We're excited as well.
And it's still new in our building, but I think a lot of people are getting a lot more exposure to it, and we're going to start seeing a lot more of the benefits take place. And I'm excited to start being able to use it on a more consistent basis myself and see how that affects all the different components of our recovery from working out or my sleep or anything like that. Do you, for anybody listening who doesn't know, do you have a suggested prescriptive amount of NanoVi? Is it like an hour a day, twice a week? Is it in 2 hours a day, every single day of the week? How often should somebody be using this?
It depends on their condition and how much exertion they've been through. If they can use it regularly, like every day or every couple of days, that's best, because it can only be helpful. And then there's 3 different devices, so it depends on which device it is. But 20 minutes on the most powerful device, it would be, way more than an hour on the least powerful device. Okay. And so that's a factor too. And it depends how much time people have, which device they get. And then we've shown clinical results with 2 sessions a week. For those were for disease markers, with no other changes in protocols. So we know that you don't have to do it every day for it to be really beneficial. And all of our studies, all but one, I think, are before and after one session. So even if you only use it once, you can be confident that it's working for you. And some of the things, like we've looked at total antioxidant activity, and that improves pretty significantly, like 13%. And NanoVi's not an antioxidant, but all those antioxidants your body produces and uses have to be implemented in ways that involve protein functions. So if you improve that, you can improve the antioxidant defense. And the reason I'm mentioning it is you'll never notice that your antioxidants are better. Like, there's so many functions in the body that are not apparent. And so some of them, like sleep or levels of stress and so on, are more apparent, but there's just so many metabolic things going on that an improvement's a good thing, but you won't notice it.
Do you think that being cognizant or aware of these improvements, even though you can't visibly see them, but maybe being cognizant and aware of these things are taking place, that you can even receive more benefits of that?
Absolutely, because that could be a placebo
I was
effect.
gonna say placebo is real.
Exactly what I
So
was thinking.
yeah, as long
It's a
as you think
wonderful
something,
thing.
Yeah.
it is. As long as you think something good is going to be happening, there's a very high chance that something good will be happening.
Is there
Right, and
any
it goes beyond, the placebo in health. It's like in life in general, that's not a bad approach.
No.
Yeah. Is there any particular times of the day or during exercise, before or after, that you guys recommend to use this, or just kind of like you said, 2 days a week was the suggested?
Oh, no, we would like you see you using it more than 2 days a
Okay.
week.
Okay.
But if you, want higher performance, use it before.
Okay.
We
Okay.
can show that it will reduce the accumulation of blood lactate,
Hmm.
and so that can be really critical for performance depending on the sport.
Great.
Um, and you can measure it with things you're using. If you're looking at watts on a bicycle or, whatever you normally do, weights, durations,
Hmm.
and so on. And then, but most athletes will use it for recovery, so they're gonna do it after exertion.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah.
What is, Rowena? That's amazing, and thank you for bringing that up. And that's something that I think we're going to share with our community here that we have too, and how our clients can benefit from that even more. I mean, before and after. Obviously, we have a lot of people going through physical exercise here every day, and sometimes more vigorous than others. But I think a lot of our clientele can benefit from before or after. So that's something that we're going to speak about.
Yeah, absolutely, because you're gonna really challenge them, and you're doing things that are outside their normal scope. So using it before might help them get farther in a session.
Mm.
And also if they can use it after, I mean, really, it's great if you can do both.
Definitely. We just had actually an open house for our recovery room that our NanoVi technology is in, this last Thursday and Saturday. So hopefully with those, we're even increasing.
Spreading the scope.
Yes, and increasing how many people are coming into the recovery room. So let's keep that going. I have one more question for you, and I think Cody does too. What is one simple tip you would give people who just entered into the paralysis community, or anybody that had just maybe got diagnosed with a neurological disorder?
Are you in the retail, restaurant, hospitality, or petroleum industry? Looking for a trusted partner with your multi-site remodel, refresh, or tech integration needs? Look no further. Apex Imaging Services is your complete solution provider. With over 7 decades of experience, we're experts in everything from general contracting to cutting-edge tech solutions. Visit apeximagingservices.com to learn how we can transform your business, increase efficiency, and elevate your brand. Apex Imaging Services. Your vision, our expertise.
Well, we just hit on it. The belief system is critical, and that you really cannot overestimate the body's ability to repair itself.
Mhm.
It's just the most amazing thing of what's possible. So I think that hopeful attitude is really key.
Hmm.
And then working with guys like you that just foster that and bring it along is to be grateful for that.
Well, thank you. We
Thank you.
greatly appreciate it. Yeah, my last question is, so we are a paralysis recovery center. So what would you say do you think is the most or the biggest area where NanoVi could help the paralysis community?
It certainly could be tissue repair and
Mm.
regeneration, depending on what's challenging a person.
Mm-hmm.
And then, to a large extent, I'm not familiar enough about the nuances of what you're doing. But any of the metabolic processes like the VO2 max and your capacity, it seems that could only be helpful for people that are challenged with paralysis.
Mm-hmm. I guess to give kind of a follow-up question of that, one of those components that I think of is hypotension or blood pressure issues. Do you think that would be an area that in the future, do you think it would have a potential positive effect?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's an area that this is all wrapped in. And well, for one thing, stress can affect that. So bringing them out of stress mode, but also those are cellular functions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that that can be helpful to improve those cellular functions.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you so much, Rowena, for taking your time and sharing all of this very valuable knowledge on a component of recovery that I don't think too many people know about yet, but what I think can be very, very large in the future. And I don't know if this is your guys' goal. Sorry, I guess to ask one more question. For NanoVi technology, is it your goal to have it something that is implemented in like every hospital, every recovery center, or every home? I guess for your long-term future of what you think nanotechnology would be.
Yes, I would love it, but really what I am most excited about seeing is having the NanoVi in areas where it can be shared.
Mm.
The technology it's a little expensive up front. It lasts forever and so on. So over time, it can be quite an inexpensive intervention. However, if it were in gyms and places where people could access it on a regular basis, we could vastly increase the number of people that we're helping.
Mm-hmm.
And so at this point, it's largely, it's economically inaccessible to too many people.
It sounds like you guys have already helped so many people and are on the road helping so many more. So we appreciate you allowing us to have your device in our center. And I'm hoping that us and as well as all of our clients are utilizing and taking those benefits from it.
Oh, you guys have been great. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for coming on. Yeah, we're very grateful and appreciative. So thank you so much again for taking your time tonight.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Rowena.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Pathways to Healing, the Perfect Step podcast. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did.
If you found today's episode to be valuable, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, share, and feel free to leave a review by clicking the link in the description below.
If you have any suggestions, feedback, or topics you'd like for us to cover in upcoming episodes, you can go to our website under the tab Pathways to Healing and fill out the form.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another engaging conversation giving insight into the paralysis community.
Until then, keep inspiring, stay resilient, and roll on.
These are your hosts, Cody Norman
and Logan Fry,
signing off.